I recently completed a Viking Rhine Getaway river cruise from Amsterdam to Basel. This video will share a quick overview of the 7-day trip. I have posted more detailed videos on many of the ports of call on this cruise, including Amsterdam, Kinderdijk, Cologne, Koblenz, Strasbourg, Colmar and the Black Forest, and Basel. So please watch those videos for more detailed information on the ports of call. I have also posted a video on the Viking Einar and Viking Sigrun river boats, so you can get an idea of the boat's layout. I have left links to all these videos from the trip in the description below. This video will give you a brief overview of the entire cruise. I'll share just the highlights day by day so you can get an idea of the cruise experience. At the end of the video, I'll share my favorite experiences and some things you should know before embarking on a similar river cruise. So here goes. I arrived in Amsterdam 3 days early so I could explore the city and get over jet lag. Amsterdam is a fabulous city, and I visited multiple museums and sites throughout my 3 days. For this video, I'll start with day 1 of the cruise. Day 1, Amsterdam. On embarkation day in Amsterdam, everyone was scheduled to board at 3 p.m. I had to check out of my hotel much earlier, so I took a chance and headed to the cruise port, arriving around 10 a.m. Fortunately, I was able to drop off my bags, but I was not able to get into my room until 3 p.m. So I headed back out onto the streets of Amsterdam without any clear destination. Since I had already seen most of the highlights of the city, I just wandered the streets and enjoyed some free exploration time. Eventually, I returned to the ship where I was able to check into my room. They gave me a key card, which served as my room key and key to get on and off the ship. We had to report for a mandatory meeting at 6 p.m. I arrived a little before 6, and the only seats available were in the Aquavit terrace, so I could only hear what was being said but couldn't see the speakers. They introduced us to the crew, reviewed the itinerary for the next day, and gave us safety information. We were then told to go to our rooms, put on our life jackets, and report to our muster stations. After that, we were served dinner in the dining room. The dining room only has large tables, so you are always eating with other passengers. I enjoyed meeting new people at each meal. Day 2, Rotterdam to Kinderdijk. I had to get up early to join an excursion at 8 a.m. Since I had already spent 3 days in Amsterdam, I opted for an excursion to a cheese farm and the windmills of Kinderdijk. The drive to the cheese farm was lovely as we passed through polders, which are sections of land that have individual water systems. It was a lovely area with swans, ducks, herons, cattle, and other wildlife spotted along the way. Once at the cheese farm, we were able to observe the process of cheese making, see how the cows were milked and bred, and eventually see the finished product in a shop where you could purchase some to take home. It was a fascinating excursion and educational. We then boarded the bus again and headed to Kinderdijk, where there are 19 monumental windmills, meaning they aren't functional anymore but serve as historical markers. One of the windmills was a museum, so we were able to go inside it and see how the mill keepers lived. It was such a picturesque setting, even though it was overcast that day. I was glad I didn't leave the Netherlands without a trip to see some windmills. Very beautiful. Once back on board the ship, we were immediately served lunch. There was a nautical info session at 2:30, tea time at 4 p.m., cocktails and music at 5:30, and the captain's toast and welcome at 6:15, followed by a port talk. You can listen to many of the talk sessions on the TV in your room if you don't feel like sitting in the lounge, which is what I did. After dinner, they had a trivia game in the lounge, and I did participate. It was great fun. All the while, the ship was moving toward Cologne. Day 3, Cologne. Once again, the boat docked about an hour before Cologne. I had signed up for the included excursion, which was a 2-hour walking tour of Cologne. We had about a 30-minute bus ride and then stopped across the river from the heart of Old Town Cologne. The walking tour consisted of a walk across the Hohenzollern Bridge into the heart of Old Town Cologne. Our first stop was the Cologne Cathedral, which is an amazing Gothic masterpiece that took 600 years to construct. It is a must-see sight in Cologne. We then walked to Old Town Square, where the guide shared interesting information on various buildings and landmarks. The city is rich in history and has some amazing architecture and sculptures. When the guide led us back toward the boat, I decided to lead the group with another passenger to visit the Lindt Chocolate Museum, which was right along the river. It was a very fun and tactile experience. I learned about the process of making chocolate and also got a few samples along the way. We then walked through the Old Town shopping district on our way to the Haymarket, which is another cobblestone town square that was quite lively as the day was pushing into dusk. We finished the day walking halfway across a bridge so we could see beautiful views of Cologne, all lit up at night. Day 4, Koblenz. The boat dropped us off in Koblenz, one of the oldest towns in Germany. We divided into groups and set off on a 90-minute walking tour. The tour highlights were the German Corner, where there is a convergence of the Rhine and Moselle rivers, the St. Castor Basilica and surrounding grounds, and the Shango Fountain, which is an iconic statue of a naughty boy who spits randomly on passers-by. After the walking tour, we were allowed to wander the town for some time. If you visit, make sure to take some time to explore the town. It has beautiful architecture with all sorts of fun and interesting details. I walked along the river and discovered some beautiful bridges and buildings lining the river's edge. After our free time, we boarded a bus, which took us to the ship that had moved farther down the Rhine. We ate lunch on board and then proceeded to travel through the most beautiful part of the Rhine. The program director narrated our cruise, pointing out the various castles along the way, and there were many of them. As a matter of fact, they distributed a brochure which lists all the castles along the Rhine in that area. It was a lovely afternoon and very picturesque. Here are some images of the trip downriver. We eventually docked at Rudesheim, which is a very small town along the river. It had a few streets lined with shops, including this cute Christmas store, and one main alleyway that had some beautiful vines arching over the pathway. There was also a clock tower that happened to chime as I was looking at it, and it had some characters that rotated around as the bells rang. Rather than eat dinner on the boat, a friend and I decided to find a restaurant in town and enjoy a meal there. We selected one with good reviews and settled in for a nice dinner with drinks. When we asked to pay our bill, we were informed that they didn't take anything but cash. I had just enough to pay for both of us with only 5 cents to spare. We laughed about it, but it wouldn't have been funny if I didn't have the cash on me. Day 5, Speyer. The ship stopped at one dock and only let people off that signed up for a specific excursion. Everyone else had to stay on board until 1 p.m. when we arrived at Speyer. I opted to forego the excursion and just explore the town on my own. The main draw of the town is the Speyer Cathedral. It is the anchor at the beginning of the town. It is one of 3 Romanesque imperial cathedrals in Germany and was consecrated in 1061. It is now on the UNESCO World Heritage List. It is a beautiful building with stones of various colors. The street and buildings leading away from the basilica are quite beautiful. Since it was Sunday, most of the shops were closed, but there were still a few pastry shops open. I wandered through several streets in the area, but the town felt very abandoned. I decided to walk to the Technik Museum to see if it looked interesting. On the way, I discovered why the town was so abandoned, because there was a fair in progress that was packed to the gills. I walked through the fair, which was fun and reminded me of trips to the state fair when I was a kid. Eventually, I reached the Technik Museum, but decided I wasn't interested enough to pay over €25 admission. So because it was a Sunday, there wasn't much to do in Speyer except enjoy the architecture and a few cafes. It is a pretty little town, and I'm sure it would have been livelier if the shops were open. Day 6, Strasbourg and Kehl. I had signed up for the included excursion to Strasbourg. The ship docked on the German side of the Rhine near the city of Kehl. So if you wanted to spend the day in Strasbourg, you had to join an excursion. We left at 8:30 in the morning. The bus dropped us off at the outskirts of the old town, which we immediately headed toward. Our guide shared information on buildings as we slowly walked through Old Town. We didn't cover much ground in the 90 minutes, but eventually reached what I thought was the highlight of Strasbourg, Petite France. It is full of half-timbered houses, canals, and bridges. It was like something out of a fairy tale, very magical. The tour ended at the Gutenberg Plaza, and the guide pointed us in the direction of Cathedral Notre Dame, which is the main historical site of the city. It is a gorgeous church with very ornate and detailed architecture, carvings, and artwork. A major attraction of the cathedral is an astronomical clock that shows much more than the time. It also indicates solar time, the day of the week, the month, the year, the sign of the zodiac, the phase of the moon, and the position of several planets. It's quite an amazing piece of engineering considering it was designed so many years ago. After the cathedral, I spent time just walking the streets. I truly appreciated the character of this city. I now rank it as one of the most beautiful cities I have visited. There was hardly a street that wasn't postcard picture perfect. After wandering and eating at a restaurant, I headed to Barrage Vauban, or Vauban Dam, which is a bridge, a dam, and defensive work erected in the 17th century. Adjacent to it are three towers, the Pont Couvert, a defensive fortification from the 13th century. The entire area is really striking with gorgeous perspectives any way you look. At this point, we had to head back to a meeting point to be escorted to our bus for the return to the ship. As I said earlier, we docked by the German village of Kehl, so once back at the ship, I headed into the heart of Kehl, which frankly was a little disappointing after spending time in such a gorgeous city as Strasbourg. The main street was lined with inexpensive clothing stores. At the end of the main walking thoroughfare was Friedenskirche, which is a Protestant church that stands alone in the center of a large plaza. There didn't seem to be much more to see, so I headed back to the ship, but stumbled upon this garden, church, and waterway. It was quite lovely, so I was glad I happened upon it. Next to the ship was a long, narrow park that led toward a bridge between France and Germany. An exquisite picture with the sun setting on my way back to the boat. Day 7, Colmar and Black Forest. I signed up for an optional excursion to the town of Colmar. The ship had docked on the German side of the Rhine, so we left at 8:45 a.m., immediately crossed into France, and drove for about 30 minutes to the town. The guide led us around for about 45 minutes, and then we had about an hour to explore on our own. Similar to La Petite France in Strasbourg, Colmar's architecture is full of half-timber houses that give it that storybook feeling. We visited a central square, the St. Martin Cathedral, the Bartholdi Museum, the March Couvert, or Covered Market, and the most picturesque area of the town, Petite Venice. I thought the town was very charming and maybe an underrated destination on the Rhine. It was a very enchanting town. After lunch, I joined a second excursion to the Black Forest. It began with a 90-minute bus ride through some beautiful scenery. When we arrived, we had several choices: view a glass-blowing demonstration, watch a Black Forest cake demonstration, watch a cuckoo clock demonstration, or go on a hike. I chose the hike, and it was fabulous, with a beautiful path taking us to bridges, streams, waterfalls, and various colored trees rising up the mountain. After returning from the hike, I was still able to catch some of the glass blowing and watch a cake demo before boarding the bus for the return trip back. This was our final day of touring on this cruise. Day 8, Basel, Switzerland. We had to be off the boat at 9 a.m. I have posted a separate video on my exploration of Basel and have left a link in the description below. So that completed my Viking Getaway river cruise. A few things you should know. First, a river cruise is different than an ocean cruise. On an ocean cruise, you go to a port, everyone gets off and back on at the same place. On a river cruise, you are often dropped off at one place for an excursion, and when the excursion is over, you join the boat in a different place. So the river boat often keeps moving along. This makes it harder for you to book any private excursions, and there often isn't much to do but sit on the boat if you don't join an excursion. The good news is that Viking includes excursions at every port. Also, if you are considering a Rhine Christmas market cruise, you should know that the Rhine Getaway stops at the same ports as the Viking Christmas market cruise. Because it is not during the holidays, it is substantially less expensive. I had a $1,600 credit from Viking because they had canceled 3 ports on an ocean cruise, so I was looking for a less expensive Viking journey, especially because Viking rarely has solo traveler deals. This cruise ticked all my boxes: less expensive, I could use my credit, and it traveled to places I hadn't been before. My favorite cities on the voyage were Strasbourg, Cologne, and Colmar, all magical in their own ways. I also really enjoyed the cruise through the castles along the Rhine. It was the one activity that you couldn't have duplicated on a land journey. As always, if you have questions, feel free to ask in the comments section. And again, I have posted detailed videos on most of the ports of call on this cruise. Please check out the Senior Solo Travel website and Travel Facebook forum where you can interact with other travelers. I have left links to all of these places in the description below. And if you'd like to follow my senior and solo travel journeys, please like and subscribe. Cheers!